Now I'd like to ask Mr. Umer Khan, who is the head of investment banking of Bank of Punjab, to give his 2 cents.
Thank you very much, Mustafa Saab. Assalamu alaikum and good morning to all of you. Can I have the sharing rights, please? I would like to put up crisp 3 slides. Yes, I think I can. And sorry, I think in the last presentation of Zubairi Saab, which was very interesting, the slides were not moving. So if they do not move even now, kindly please somebody speak up and let me know. So is the first slide visible to everyone?
Yes.
Great, thank you very much. I just have 3 crisp slides, and I would like to, because we are on the clock, so I would like to be very calculated here, and would not repeat some of the things that Zubairi Saab has very clearly mentioned. So being a financier and representative of commercial banks, I think it's important to have perspective of large local commercial banks who have been part of CPEC projects. I would like to restrict myself primarily to two areas. One, about the financing measures that can be utilized and specific interventions on the renewable energy side, capacity additions on the renewable energy side. And the second, I would briefly touch upon the efficacy and the use case for these 2 mechanisms, like energy transition mechanisms and JETPs, and what is their applicability in the context of Pakistan. I am on the second slide on the left side. I hope it's visible to everyone. On the financing measures, there are concessional funding available, and we are talking about hard currency financing. As a financier, I think the single biggest challenge that any of these projects, any large infrastructure project, specifically renewable energy projects, would face is the availability of hard currency funding. So there's no shortage of funding per se, but I think it's important because Zubairi Saab also mentioned about the cost of that funding. So institutions like the Green Climate Fund, and there are certain other international DFIs which offer concessional funding specifically for green interventions and for renewable energy projects. And these fundings are available at a project-wide level, as well as this funding line can also be provided to domestic Pakistani banks and financial institutions, who can then use this concessional funding to on-lend the requisite amount of foreign currency to qualifying projects. So these are 2 methods available. We need to sort of take use of it, make use of it. Risk guarantees are also on offer. So certain domestic financial institutions who are full up in terms of their credit appetite, they can benefit from such products and basically increase their exposure further on the renewable energy space. Co-financings, which is basically joint financings by international DFIs and domestic commercial financial institutions, who each take care of the respective leg of the transaction, which means that international DFIs like the IFCs, Proparcos, FMOs, ADBs, they take care of the foreign currency requirement, and the local currency piece can be taken on by the local commercial banks and FIs. The second one is the second intervention is specifically tailored to domestic banks. We generally respond very well as an industry, the domestic commercial banks, to directed lending. So we have experimented with this in other industries also. So what we are suggesting is that mandatory targets need to be introduced in a stepped up or in a phased manner for domestic commercial banks and DFIs by the central bank. If the incentive has to be sweetened further, then certain tax breaks can also be introduced on income generated by these banks on refinancing, so thereby further incentivizing. And obviously, a carrot and stick approach can also be adopted, where penalties can also be imposed on commercial banks who fail to meet these mandatory targets. Zubairi Saab and Mustafa Saab, you also spoke about using newer financing instruments. So absolutely, we need to tap all the funding pots available, especially for hard currency. So green bonds, there's a lot of appetite amongst international investors for green bonds. You also mentioned, and you were right, that there have been very few interventions in Pakistan. WAPDA's 500 million euro bond is one example. But I think there have not been any other notable international level interventions insofar as Pakistani enterprises are concerned. So yes, that's a focus, should be a focus area. You also mentioned panda bonds, which I think is a very, very important source of funding, especially because increasingly almost exclusively all of our equipment and contracting is being done by Chinese enterprises. So I think it makes a lot of sense that Chinese commercial investors. So this is basically Chinese local currency funding, and I think it's important that Pakistani enterprises and companies take benefit of the Chinese domestic local currency funding which is available. There has been a lot of talk about voluntary carbon markets and carbon credits and carbon trading. I think that is an area where we lag far behind. Zubairi Saab also spoke, and I think in the similar vein, it's a similar idea that we need to look at PPIB is there as a one window facilitator, that's right. But we are talking more on the likes of, we had some fantastic erstwhile institutions like the NDFCs and IDBPs and Bankers Equity, which back in the 70s and 80s did some fantastic work in terms of developing infrastructure in Pakistan. So on the similar lines, what we are suggesting is a green infrastructure fund or a green infrastructure bank, which should have the exclusivity of mandate. It should have dedicated expertise also, and very importantly, a large funding base, because so that it can spearhead, and as Zubairi Saab was mentioning, so that it can channelize and help other co-investors and domestic banks and other institutions to sort of partner with them. Very importantly, it will help on the economies of scale side. And this is a point that I will touch upon later also, because typically on the renewable energy side, frankly, the interventions have been very, very small. So even when you talk about the likes of IFCs and other multilaterals, they typically look at anywhere between 20 to 50 megawatt per project. Now, these institutions, with all due respect, are great, but they take a lot of time. Project development takes a lot of time. I think it's important that we need to increase the size of the intervention, which means that as opposed to 50 or 20 or 30 megawatts, this needs to be done on a mass scale. So we need to be looking at project sizes of 200, 250 megawatts at least, so that it's a meaningful contribution for the time that will be required. Collaboration is very important, and not just on the brick and mortar side, as you rightly said, Mustafa Saab. I think it's important that Chinese and Pakistani commercial banks and FIs, we need to be more in touch through formal forums, because in our interactions with them on various forums, we find there's a lot of understanding gap and misconceived notions in terms of, especially revolving around the foreign currency regime in Pakistan. And it's sort of a black box, whereas it shouldn't be the case. State Bank is very, very clear in terms of how the equity has to be come in, and we often find ourselves stuck with certain Chinese enterprises who bring their equity investment in without proper registration, and then they face issues and repatriation of that money. So that people-to-people contact, especially on the financial institution side, is critical, I think, in terms of removing some of these misconceptions and then improving upon some of the processes where the improvement requirement lies. We need to deepen up our capital markets for bonds and equities domestically. The derivative market has to be developed, so that we can further incentivize this. This was on the financing side. Very briefly, the elephant in the room, Zubairi Saab also mentioned. I think there have to be very visible confidence building measures for existing sponsors and developers of projects which find themselves, issues, especially with respect to outstanding receivables. What is very important is there has to be a very visible follow through in terms of those issues being resolved for that necessary confidence to be going, because really, with those guys stuck, we really can't be asking them for any more money in terms of further investment on the renewable side. Efforts should be made towards increasing electricity demand. I think it's a double whammy right now that we are facing as a country. I think government, the idea was right a couple of years ago, where they incentivized additional usage of electricity because it helps reduce the capacity charges per unit. And I think it's important. Grid enhancements has already been spoken about. I'll skip it. I think this is also not a new idea, but very important that technology transfer, especially on the solar panel side and inverter side, is something that we need to be looking at, maybe over a 5 to 7 year period, because it will help conserve eventually the much needed foreign currency. Real-time data availability across different verticals in the energy chain is important for important decision making. It will also give a lot of confidence to investors and will further help attract investment there. Very briefly, our take on ETMs and just energy transition partnerships. I would basically second what Zubairi Saab has said, that on-ground realities represent that these represent some of the most efficient plants that Pakistan has right now. And also, as he very rightly mentioned, we are under strong concessions, and it is very difficult to just break away these arrangements right now, and we will have a stranded assets. What we are also suggesting, just like Zubari sir suggested, is that we need to be looking at their immediate conversion to Thar coal, because that will immediately result in savings of about 25 to 30% and maybe more. So the idea is that we should probably let them run their remaining useful life, otherwise they will become a stranded asset. But we should reduce the pain and reduce our dependence on the volatility in the international coal price market by converting them to third coal. And probably, yes, I think no more capacity additions on the coal side. In any event, our stock of coal projects as a percentage of our total generation capacity is not very large. We are about 7 gigawatts. Vietnam is 37, India is 207. So, we are bad, but there are worse out there, right? Also, I think in terms of these interventions, our suggestion is that these interventions probably need to be targeted towards our furnace oil projects, which are towards the end of their concession life. They are not being dispatched also. So I think these ETMs and JETMs probably are more suited in Pakistan's case for conversion of these oil-based projects. So what are we essentially saying? This is my last slide. So what we are saying is we need to sort out issues of existing plant owners. This is the last one in the coal phase out that I'm talking about. Their receivables should be cleared on priority, visible follow through, and very importantly, in exchange for sort of helping those projects through, the government can possibly agree on an arrangement with those developers that they will help set up a minimum of 200 to 300 megawatt each of renewable energy projects at tariffs which are lower than the prevailing rates. We need to increase the demand side, as I said, which will help reduce the burden of capacity charges. On the financing measures, again, I think what's also important, as I mentioned, the economies of scale point earlier also, we need to pull in our efforts. We need to increase the size of the interventions, and as opposed to 50, 20 megawatt projects in one single go. For example, the government of Pakistan can enter into alliances or arrangements with each of the leading DFIs like ADB and IFC and Proparcos and FMOs, and maybe develop a 5-year program where each one of them is sort of tasked to develop, let's say, 1,000 megawatts each over the next 5 years. So the idea is pooling enough resources and sort of increasing capacities at a larger
Umer
scale.
Saab, time is running out.
30 seconds. Last 30 seconds. This is the last point that I'm making. Thank you for this. Very important. I think this is what we have also been advocating at a couple of other forums where we work together with the Chinese partners. I think the Chinese commercial lenders need to look at their commercial security that they take when they project finance these assets, because some of the problems can be alleviated if you bring in local commercial banks here. But because they effectively do not leave any security available from the project assets for local commercial lenders, thereby, it basically does not allow local banks to come in, step in and provide local currency financing, which would help some of the cash flow issues that some of these large Chinese coal projects are taking. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Umer Saab. I think these are some good points, and I think that banks here, like Bank of Punjab, like HBL and other banks, I think need to engage more on this in this area. I think there's not enough engagement from banks and their perspectives and how they can contribute, and of course, and then working with State Bank as we discussed earlier. Particularly, I think green products, I think will be a very good opportunity for Pakistan, because China is way ahead in it already, and I think they'd be very happy to share their experience and share how we can cooperate if we show initiative in this regard.